Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
We have covered what we call the diner rebellion. Small town diners in the prairies simply saying, we're not going to shut down. The big cities might be paranoid about this pandemic, but our town is virus free. We know everyone, we trust everyone. We're just not going to live like we're under house arrest. Sheila Gunn Reid told you the story about the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, and other cafes like the Noble Fox in Bashaw. I think those are important because small businesses, those are a livelihood for so many Canadians, and why should they be closed, whereas the big box stores like Costco and Walmart remain open? I just don't get it. Well, we've also focused on churches, and churches have been particularly punished by these lockdowns. I have my suspicions of why. In my view, anyone who believes in something other than lockdownism, anyone who believes that there's a higher authority than just some politician or a bureaucrat, well, they're going to be a real pain in the neck to the lockdowns because they simply won't live in fear and won't follow ridiculous and capricious rules. And some of those rules, such as in Montreal, for example, allow the reopening of movie theaters for well over 100 people, but massive cathedrals can only have 10 people. Well, what's the difference? We're taking some cases of some churches, but I am delighted to say that our friends at the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedom are doing the really heavy lifting on church freedom. Obviously would apply to synagogues and temples and mosques too. And what a pleasure it is now to connect with the boss of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, my own friend and a friend to our viewers, John Carpay, who joins us now via Skype. Well, John, I got to tell you, you are lifting a heavy load out there. You're in a 3-day hearing in Vancouver for church rights. You've got the very next day a hearing in Edmonton for Pastor James Coates, who's been in prison for I think more than 2 weeks now. I think you're doing more religious liberty litigation in Canada than any of the so-called civil liberties groups who've gone silent. And I want to thank you for that on behalf of our rebel viewers.
It's important work and it's got to get done. We've got currently 9 full-time lawyers working on cases across Canada. And we're looking to hire another 3 or 4 lawyers as soon as possible. So if any of your viewers, if you're a lawyer or if you know a lawyer that loves liberty, that has some litigation experience, we want to hire another 3 or 4 full-time staff lawyers as soon as possible because the amount of work is astronomical. The charter rights and freedoms are being heavily, severely, unjustifiably violated all across Canada.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you. On the screen right now, you can see police with guns in their holsters walking right into a church in Calgary. I think you guys are actually representing this church. I was so infuriated by that act of intimidation, John. These churches are the most peaceful places imaginable. These aren't Hell's Angels biker clubs where cops need to go in SWAT team style. The only possible reason for those armed police to walk into a church is for an intimidation factor. And I'm not asking you to speak about that particular church in Calgary because I understand you have a legal process afoot there. But I think that goes to the mindset of these public health tyrants. I don't think it's appropriate that police run their errands for them. I think that's probably constitutionally suspect, but it gives us an insight into the mind of all these public health bosses who are unaccountable, who have dictator-like power, and are taking on the trappings of a police state. Like, it's bizarre to me that in the name of public health, you send in someone with a gun in a holster to a church. That gives away the whole game to me, John.
It's terribly sad because there are lots of Canadians that they are pro-police. They want to be pro-police. They don't want to see the police defunded. They want to see the police enforcing, the criminal code prohibitions against things like murder and rape and assault and all kinds of other fraud, all kinds of crime. And unfortunately, our politicians have turned the police against the people by passing unjust laws in the name of health orders. And you mentioned the lack of accountability. Well, one of the legal arguments that we are bringing forward in our court actions in Alberta and Manitoba and other provinces where we are now challenging the lockdowns in court is that this is a blatant violation of the Constitution, not just the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but also the non-charter parts of our Constitution that require that laws be passed by the elected members of a democratically elected legislative assembly. And this is a core component of Canada's Constitution, that you don't have unelected, unaccountable, politically appointed people that are passing general laws that apply to all citizens and just passing new laws every week, every month on a whim with no democratic accountability. None of these health orders, which violate our rights and freedoms, have been considered, debated, voted on, or approved by the elected members of the Legislative Assembly or the elected or federally, by the federal Parliament. So this is another issue that we're putting before the courts in addition to the charter violations.
I'm so glad to hear that. One of the things I find infuriating is when our reporters interact with police, which regrettably we do almost every day, is the police have no clue. In the past, in the before times, police would study the criminal code, or they might know a couple of bylaws here and there. And the laws would basically be the same every week, every month, every year. If there was a big innovation, they would hear about it. They would be briefed about it by their police departments. But these lockdown rules or guidances or suggestions, some of them are just press conferences. Nobody knows what the rules are. The politicians don't know what the rules are. And these cops clearly don't know either. And so they're either guessing or going with their own personal opinion, or just they don't like the cut of someone's jib. So it couldn't be clear when it comes to protests, for example. Black Lives Matter protests during the pandemic, you literally see cops taking a knee. But anti-lockdown protests, you see cops throwing people in the back of paddy wagons. And there's no consistency in the application of the laws. I don't think the police understand the laws, and I have some sympathy for them because the laws change. Like, do you think the cops really know the difference between a code red and a code gray and a code orange? I don't think that even the bureaucrats who wrote those understand it. And yet I don't see any judges saying, whoa, it's been a year, no more excuses. When this was all ramshackle, hustle bustle, we could let you have some leeway, but it's been a year now and it's just getting worse. Where are the judges?
We're gonna find out where they are, but I really hope that they're going to fulfill their role of upholding rights and freedoms. That's what the courts are there for. Since 1982, since we've had the charter, the way it's supposed to work is that when politicians, perhaps with good intentions, but also perhaps acting out of fear and panic and without facts, when politicians violate our rights and freedoms and perhaps have strong public support for doing so, the courts are supposed to be there to say, wait a minute, no, there's no justification, or there isn't adequate justification for these health orders that violate our freedoms to, move, travel, worship, assemble peacefully, associate, and so on. The opening line of the charter, the preamble of the charter, says that Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And part of the rule of law, and as you know, Ezra, you're a lawyer as well, several dimensions to the rule of law. One of them is clarity in the law. And yet we get these health orders that say, we should, or it would be best if, as opposed to clear legal language that says must or shall.
Yeah.
And you've got laws promulgated by way of press conferences. I mean, it's a complete disregard for Canada's Constitution. And so I'm hoping that judges will not shy away from what might prove to be an unpopular task of upholding rights and freedoms.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.